To ensure stable borders, as early as the Qin and Han dynasties, the Great Wall was constructed. The comprehensive repair of the wall provided the Western Han Dynasty with an extremely solid defensive barrier. But with such a strong defensive system already in place, why did Emperor Wu of Han still have to launch large-scale wars against the Xiongnu? Could it be that these wars were truly unavoidable? And if they had to be fought, what would have been the right way to wage them? Today, Dailang will carefully discuss these questions with everyone. To understand the matter clearly, we must first grasp what kind of people the Xiongnu were. In history, there have been many different theories about the origin of the Xiongnu. For example, in the records of the Grand Historian, biography of the Xiongnu, it is mentioned that they were descendants of the Xiaohu clan. The modern scholar Wang Gui believed that the predecessors of the Xiongnu were the Xianyun tribe, which was the Rongdi tribes during the spring and autumn period. But regardless of which explanation one accepts, by the time of the Han, this ethnically complex group had developed into a vast territorial power, sparsely populated but highly mobile. Their primary economy relied on hunting, nomadism, and herding. Their daily life depended largely on cattle, horses, and sheep, so their main food was meat and milk. They migrated following the grasslands, sometimes fished, and their clothing was simple. According to modern archaeological discoveries, in some relic sites of the Xiongnu tribes, there are traces of grains, even existing granaries, as well as various pottery and metal tools. However, all of these were small in scale. This shows that under the rule of the Xiongnu government, most of the people could not live entirely on agriculture and handicraft trade. So where did they seek their supplies? Inevitably, the Xiongnu turned their gaze to the south. In the 3rd century BCE, Tumen Xiongnu, driven by expansionist ambition, led his people southward to plunder, but he encountered Qin Shi Huang and the mighty Qin army. The records of the Grand Historian records that Tumen could not prevail and had to retreat north. In On Passing Qin, Jia Yi described the situation even more vividly. Meng Tian guarded the Great Wall. The Xiongnu retreated 700 li, not daring to move south, not even daring to raise their bows while herding horses, but only to lament. However, by the early Han Dynasty, the situation had changed. Tumen Xiongnu was shot dead by his own unfilial son. That son succeeded him as Xiongnu. This was Modu Xiongnu. How did the Xiongnu view such behavior? Similar to Lu Bu killing his master, they instead regarded him as unparalleled in bravery and rallied behind him. Under Modu Xiongnu, the Xiongnu territory expanded enormously, forming a structured political system. Beneath the Xiongnu were, in order, the left and right worthy princes, the left and right Guli kings, the left and right great generals, the left and right grand commandants, the left and right great household managers, and the left and right guduho. According to actual records, these men appeared to be subordinates of the Xiongnu, but in reality, they were leaders of their own tribes. The forces under their command varied. Some had up to 10,000 cavalry, while others had several thousand. Below them, positions were arranged by rank, commanders of 1,000, 100, and 10. Therefore, rather than calling the Xiongnu a unified empire like a tightly clenched fist, in reality they were more like an alliance of nomadic tribes arranged by relative strength. The Xiongnu, as the supreme leader, had to be the strongest and most capable war wolf who could lead everyone to live well. If he succeeded, he was honored as Xiongnu. If not, he would be despised. Within this structure, when the Xiongnu marched south to invade and plunder the Han, it was not only to satisfy economic needs, but also to maintain their own ruling order. As long as these economic and political needs existed, the raids could only pause temporarily and could never truly end. As for the needs of the Xiongnu, the Han court was not without thoughts of compromise. From Emperor Gaozu of Han to Emperor Jing of Han, the Heqin marriage alliance policy was fundamentally the main strategy to deal with the Xiongnu. It could be summarized in several points: using money, wealth, and princesses in marriage to attract the Xiongnu. At first glance, this did not seem shameful, for if houses, riches, and women could satisfy the Xiongnu, then warfare could be avoided. The idea sounded wonderful, but how did its implementation turn out? Although a portion of the Xiongnu aristocracy was indeed corrupted, they were only a small minority. The vast majority of the Xiongnu still maintained their old lifestyle and frequently came south to raid. For them, it was a transaction with only profit and no loss. The Xiongnu Chanyus could not possibly, because of marrying a Han princess or listening to the words of a pillow mate, risk being killed by their own subordinates or even their own sons just to give up plundering. Even more troublesome, the Heqin policy only made the Xiongnu more arrogant and expansionist. Their power even extended to the oasis states in the western regions. The Xiongnu, on one hand, used benefits to entice and, on the other, used military force to threaten and control the local chiefs. They themselves enjoyed life like heavenly sovereigns, sitting idly each year while collecting taxes, agricultural products, and handicrafts. Their power grew increasingly formidable, and in their letters to the Han court, the tone of the Xiongnu became even more arrogant, calling themselves born of heaven and earth, cherished by the sun and moon. The Grand Chanyu of the Xiongnu even inquired about the health of the Han Emperor. Listen to that, it was as if they saw themselves as the true orthodoxy ordained by heaven and earth. As for the Han Emperor, in their eyes, he was nothing special as the son of heaven. This enraged and humiliated the Han officials. Jia Yi once bitterly criticized the situation. The world's order had been turned upside down, with bandits sitting on top while the Han had to bow beneath, to the point of even being questioned about the emperor's age. How could such disgrace be tolerated? Therefore, by the time of Emperor Wu of Han, especially when Liu Che truly took power, the situation began to change. On one hand, the country had abundant reserves, treasuries were full, and grain supplies were plentiful, providing a solid material foundation. On the other hand, agriculture had advanced, the number of horses had grown significantly, and the fields were full of herds. This made the Han Dynasty believe that they finally had the capacity to build a cavalry force capable of contending with the Xiongnu. But wanting to fight, being able to fight, did not guarantee that fighting would be effective. Could war truly change the economic and political model of the Xiongnu? Before launching the campaigns, even within the Han court, there was hesitation. Both supporters and opponents of war had their own reasoning. This was understandable, for war itself is a monstrous devourer of gold. Moreover, distant expeditions across the grasslands meant long supply lines and extremely heavy logistics. The Xiongnu were adept at the tactic of attacking when advantageous, retreating when disadvantaged, hit-and-run warfare that drained Han forces. Even when victories were won, Han losses were significant. For example, from 125 BCE to 124 BCE, the Han court spent 200,000 catties of gold on military expenses alone and lost another 100,000 horses. In 119 BCE, although the Han defeated the Xiongnu, they paid with tens of thousands of soldiers, tens of thousands of horses, and 500,000 catties of gold, a staggering price. Even so, why was there still a need to fight? Because as the war progressed, the Han gradually realized that military strikes could indeed shift the balance. Previously, the Heqin marriage alliance policy aimed to increase the benefits of peace to persuade the Xiongnu to abandon military actions. But as long as the Xiongnu lived in an economy lacking agriculture and handicraft trade, they would always crave supplies. No matter how much the Han provided, it could never feed all of the Xiongnu. Military action, however, was different. It did not increase the benefits of peace. Instead, it raised the cost of plundering for the Xiongnu. Just as with the earlier reasoning for building the Great Wall, through its system of walls and frontier fortresses, the Xiongnu could no longer raid southward as if entering an unguarded land. Whenever they marched, they had to endure wooden defenses, stones, and fire attacks from the defending troops. More importantly, in the past, the Xiongnu could raid and then ride away, even mocking "Come over here and fight." But when the Han changed strategies, the Xiongnu discovered that Han forces truly dared to pursue deep into the steppe. At first, the Xiongnu used guerrilla tactics to handle Gongsun Ao and Gongsun He, even once capturing General Li Guang. But when Wei Qing appeared, the situation completely shifted. He repeatedly achieved victories at Longcheng, Gaokui, and many other places, and the balance of war began tipping toward the Han. The Han army successively defeated the Xiongnu's Baiyang king and Lufan king, recovering the critical region of Hetao. From 125 BCE onward, the Han repeatedly dispatched troops either to pin down Xiongnu forces or to raid and embed their power deep within Xiongnu territory. By the 10th year of the war, in 123 BCE, Emperor Wu of Han ordered Wei Qing to lead 6 armies departing from Dingxiang, advancing directly toward the Chanyu's headquarters at Mo Bay. Although the Han forces suffered heavy losses, they killed over 10,000 Xiongnu soldiers. This victory proved that, with strong national power, abundant talent, and steady battle tempo, the Han had not only adapted to the Xiongnu's combat rhythm, but were gradually seizing the initiative. In this very Mo Bay campaign, a youth of 17 or 18 led only 800 soldiers detached from the main force and managed to kill more than 2,000 Xiongnu, including the uncles and grandfather of the Xiongnu Chanyu. That young man was Huo Kubing. In the remaining 6 short years of his life, he would terrify countless Xiongnu and have his name celebrated for 1,000 years across the land of Wuxia. To avoid precise and devastating strikes from the Han army, the Xiongnu were forced to change their rhythm of nomadic herding. They often had to gather their livestock into large herds or even migrate out of season. But the consequence was that the animals easily starved or froze, outbreaks of disease occurred, and the nomads themselves suffered. The Book of Han records that, at that time, the Xiongnu people froze to death and starved in countless numbers, unable to depend on one another for survival. That was only if they managed to escape pursuit. If caught by Wei Qing's forces, 2,300 men would be cut down and all their carts and supplies would be confiscated. If they resisted and refused to submit, then 3,017 people would be killed and over 1 million horses, cattle and sheep would be taken. If they encountered Huo Kubing, he would behead even Xiongnu kings like the Jelen king. Marquis of Liu annihilated the Xiongnu's golden cavalry, capturing members of the Xiongnu royal family along with many subordinate generals, and beheaded 8,960 men. More seriously, he captured the Chanyu's wife, the princes, and 59 others, as well as the general of Shanggu Commandery, household commanders, and commandant 63 people in total. Altogether, 30,210 were killed or captured alive, nearly wiping out the Xiongnu aristocracy. This made the Xiongnu fully realize that raiding south for plunder not only brought diminishing benefits and increasing risks, but could also cost them their lives. After years of mobile warfare and relentless pursuit, the population, production, and wealth of the Xiongnu all suffered devastating losses. Even their political structure, centered on the Chanyu as the alpha wolf surrounded by his followers, began to waver. In the second year of Yuanshou, after Huo Kubing's great victory at Heqin, the Chanyu was furious and sought to hold the Shutu king and the Kunta king accountable. These two kings immediately understood that the Chanyu not only intended to punish them, but also aimed to annex their tribes and seize their power. Realizing that following the Chanyu would not end well, the Kunta king decisively led more than 40,000 of his people to submit to the Han. Compared with life under Xiongnu rule, sometimes living in fear of Han army pursuit, sometimes unable to avoid oppression from the Chanyu, forever anxious now, upon surrendering, they became valued allies and could live in peace. This shift made many Xiongnu begin to reconsider, and more tribes realized that using force to assault the Han might no longer be a viable path, while submission to the Han instead offered a way out. Thus, the political model that had once taken raiding south as its fundamental strategy began to change. As the Xiongnu and the Han armies clashed head-on in battles between commanders and generals, the steppe's balance quietly shifted. The nomadic tribes, long suppressed by the Xiongnu cavalry, forced to swallow their bitterness, such as Wusun, Daiyuan, and Lulan, finally broke free from direct Xiongnu control and found opportunities to rise. They either took advantage of the moment to rally scattered tribes around them or developed their nomadic strength and cavalry, gradually escaping their disadvantaged position and slowly growing stronger. These tribes understood well that opposing the Xiongnu on their own was like striking an egg against a rock, so they had never dared to challenge them alone. But when the Han army advanced deep into the steppe and fought the Xiongnu to a standstill, they saw an opportunity to leverage outside power. By acting as assistants to the Han army, providing intelligence or sending troops to cooperate, they could both weaken their eternal enemy, the Xiongnu, and expand their own power in the process. Some even secretly plotted to replace the Xiongnu and become the overlords of the steppe. Their ambition and daring were by no means small. In the second year of Benchu under Emperor Xuan of Han, the Wusun kingdom, which had already established an alliance with the Han, directly dispatched 100,000 golden cavalry from the western regions to launch an expedition. Together with the Han army, they formed an east-west pincer, exerting their full strength to coordinate military actions. It was precisely thanks to this combined power that the Han forces were able, in that battle, to heavily wound the main forces of the Xiongnu and win an important victory. Of course, war has always been brutal. Even though the Han won many victories in battles against the Xiongnu, the price was tragic and heart-wrenching. For example, in the decisive battle at Mobei during Emperor Wu of Han's reign, the Han army set out with as many as 140,000 war horses. Yet, by the time they returned in triumph, fewer than 30,000 horses remained alive. Most had perished on the battlefield or collapsed from exhaustion along the long march. Waves upon waves of soldiers from the north marched to the frontier, only to bury their bones in the yellow sands in one fierce battle after another, never to return to their homeland. Because of this, many years after the Mobei battle, the Han court's manpower and resources were drained, leaving it unable to continue large-scale campaigns. For a long period, they could not organize major northern expeditions against the Xiongnu. But even at such a steep cost, from a macro-historical perspective, the significance of the Han-Xiongnu wars went beyond the victory or defeat of individual battles. When the Han armies, under famous generals such as Wei Qing, Huo Kubing, Li Guang, and Zhao Xin, braved the windswept sands and frozen steppe again and again, they shattered the myth of the Xiongnu's invincibility. When the Great Wall, once eroded by national weakness, was repaired and fortified, it firmly guarded the frontiers and protected the common people. When the steel cavalry of the Great Han broke the Xiongnu defensive line, seized Longxi territory, established Liang province, and brought order and culture to the far northwest. When Huo Kubing led a massive army to crush the main Xiongnu forces, pursued them all the way to Mount Langjutsu, and there held a solemn ceremony to heaven, proclaiming to heaven and earth the glorious achievements of the Great Han. All of these were the results of decades of patient accumulation, from the civil aspirations and martial strategies of successive emperors to the diligent farming of the common people that filled the granaries, to the exquisite craftsmanship of artisans who forged sharp weapons and sturdy fortresses, to the fearless, arduous training of soldiers on the frontiers. All these forces converged to create the magnificent legacy of the Han Dynasty.